Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I'm glad you could all get here before the terrible snowstorm that's going to hit. I mean, I'm surprised that we haven't preemptively surrendered already. We think there might be an inch of snow sometime here in the next 24 hours. Usually by now we've closed the federal government. Anyway, we're becoming a country of wimps. Anyway, I'm glad you're all here, and I'm glad we're continuing with our efforts today. My name is John Hamre. I'm the president at CSIS, and I want to say welcome to all of you. My role here today is twofold. I'm going to introduce John Hess in just a moment, but the first thing is to tell you, we always start with a little safety announcement. I'm going to be responsible for everybody's well-being today. If we hear a voice that tells us that we're going to leave the property, you're going to follow me. We've got this exit and that one right over there. We're going to go that way. We're going to go down to the ground level. The stairs are right over there. We'll take two left-hand turns, go over to National Geographic, and by then I'll have hot chocolate, and it'll be lined up for you. We're going to be just fine. Nothing's going to happen, but please follow my instructions if I have to ask you to do something. We're very pleased that Fatih Birol has come again to CSIS to share with us the energy outlook, and this is something that we're grateful to have this partnership. But my role today is to introduce to you a member of my board who I've learned so much from. He's going to be the official host for us today. That's John Hess. I first met John when we had a little project here at CSIS, and it was looking at the role that the profit-seeking private sector plays in development. And we were exploring this as a whole new angle. We tend to think in Washington of development as being USAID, government dollars, et cetera. And instead there's this huge, huge ongoing effort the private sector plays every day in developing resources around the world and also carrying forward American values. Especially rule of law, transparency, sanctity of contracts, all of the things that are so important for people around the world. And I heard about a project that Hess Oil was doing jointly with ExxonMobil in Guyana, and it was kind of a model project. So that's how we first met, and I used that as an opportunity to learn a little bit more. And I must say I've been quite surprised at how Hess Oil has been in the forefront of sustainable energy development. I think for 9 years running, Hess Oil has been recognized as one of the leading companies in the world for sustainable development, and really a champion for what most Americans want. They want a clean environment and they want reliable energy supplies. And no one has done that better than Hess Oil, and John Hess has been a champion for that. He's done that here at CSIS. I'm very proud to have him on the board, but you go to any major energy conference like CIRA or FIRO, you're going to see John Hess leading the way with helping everyone understand. So would you please welcome John? He's going to be the official host and he'll introduce Fatih. John Hess, please. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for the kind words, and everyone welcome today. It's a great pleasure to welcome my dear friend, Fatih Birol, Dr. Fatih Birol, who is the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency. As many of you know, the IEA was founded in 1974 by Dr. Henry Kissinger, who was Secretary of State at the time. And really it was to pull together the OECD countries to deal with oil supply interruptions. And that really is how the organization started. But it has grown and expanded its scope immeasurably, especially under the leadership of Dr. Fatih Birol, who became Executive Director in 2015, and now has a much wider remit as truly the global energy forum for the world. So it was great today, Dr. Fatih, that you were able to talk to Congress and really engage and educate them in some of the energy challenges we face, as well as the climate changes that we face going forward. I think it's amazing, and I remember hearing Dr. Fatih Birol talk here a couple of years ago about his vision for the organization, about how it shouldn't just be an OECD-centric organization, but one that's global. And since then, he's brought a number of the emerging markets or developing economies in, China, India, Brazil, all very important in the energy picture, but also done a lot to build engagement with the producing countries. So truly now the IEA is the leading global energy forum in the world, and Dr. Fatih Birol needs to be congratulated and also very much supported in this important effort. I also recently had the great honor of attending the IEA Ministerial Conference last November and saw firsthand the important role that Dr. Fatih Birol and the IEA play in terms of engaging and educating government leaders in the subject of energy security, economic development, and also environmental stewardship. So, you know, the role that this organization plays is very important, and having Dr. Fatih Birol here in our country to help us better understand what's going on in other parts of the world in terms of energy and the climate is very, very important. Dr. Fatih Birol, in my opinion, is the world's thought leader in energy, very knowledgeable about the energy markets, be it oil, gas, or coal, very knowledgeable about the role of renewables, the electrification of vehicles, and also how can one grow energy supply to help lift so many countries out of poverty, but at the same time decrease our carbon footprint. So, you know, he is as knowledgeable in these areas as anyone that I've ever met, and we're honored to have him here at CSIS today, but also has become a tradition where he talks about the world energy outlook, and he's going to go over the current outlook with us. And with that, a warm welcome to my dear, dear friend and esteemed colleague, Dr. Fatih Birol.
So, first of all, very many thanks to CSIS for inviting me to this meeting, and thank you very much, John, for your extremely nice introduction. It is perhaps in the profession I have, it is one of the things that you can reach after so many years, to be introduced by one of the industry leaders. In that way, it is something really a big professional satisfaction. Thank you very much, John, for your very, very kind words. I am here today to share with you our views about the global energy picture, as John said. And if you have questions afterwards, I will be happy to answer them. It became a tradition that I thank CSIS for all the time, also the stuff you sent to IEA. So thank you very much for that. Very good colleagues from CSIS come to IEA, work with us. We benefit from them a lot. But this time I would like to thank the US government. Where is Dave Turk? Dave Turk is not here. Dave is there. So somebody from the US government recently joined to IEA. Thank you very much, Dave, for all the great work you are doing, advising me on many things and pushing our agenda forward. But very happy to, if I'm invited next year, to come here and to talk about if there are other people coming from CSIS to IEA, to work with them and to report their success or failure, in that case, with about the IEA work. Now, first of all, let me start by saying that at the IEA, we see, when we look at the next few years, we see 4 major upheavals in the world. Of course, there are many trends, but 4 of them we think are so important in terms of their size and in terms of the speed they are coming to the energy world, that no country will be immune to those upheavals. What are those? Number 1, we think United States set to become the undisputed leader of oil and gas production for many years to come, with all its implications. This is, I think, perhaps the most important transformations that we are seeing in the oil and gas business. Number two, another different one, solar PV is becoming so cheap that in many countries, especially in the emerging world, it is becoming the cheapest source of electricity generation. And this has huge implications for both the solar, but also competing fuels and also electricity networks. Number three, China. China, ladies and gentlemen, changed its economic policy significantly in the last 2 years, moving from a heavy industry-based, being the world's industry workshop, to becoming an economy which is much lighter service-oriented economy. And the last Chinese Communist Party Congress a few months ago, President Xi summarized the new Chinese energy policy under the motto, "We want to make the skies of China blue again." So China is going to push energy policies which are very different than we saw in the past. Please remember a few years ago when China boom started with the dot economic policies, what are the impacts on the oil markets, what are the impacts on the coal markets, but now they are turning their attention to gas, clean energy technologies and others, and we will see the implications of that in the markets. If I can just one number, I want to give it to you just to show you how China is important, or these decisions are important. China basically stopped using coal for heating in some parts of China. As a result of that, they have imported a lot of LNG. And as a result of that, only in about 1 year of time, LNG prices in Asia Pacific went from $6 to $11, so almost double. This is based on the Chinese decision. And there are many, many examples of that, just to give you an example. The fourth transformation is on the electricity sector. Electricity demand is growing at least 2 times faster than the global energy demand. The share of electricity is increasing significantly as a result of cooling, as a result of digitalization, electric cars, and other things. So these are the 4 major and completely different from each other transformations. US pushing the oil and gas, becoming the leader there. Solar power becoming cheaper and cheaper source of electricity generation, the first source of electricity generation in many countries. China, with its new policies, being the largest energy consumer of the world, changing its energy policy and its direction with all its implications, and electricity is growing very strongly. And these changes are happening not only in big terms, volumes are big. You all know better than me the oil and gas volumes from United States. Solar PV, for example, just let me tell you, in the year 2016, the last data we have, of all the power plants built in the world, new capacity additions, 51% was solar, 49% is other renewables, wind, geothermal, plus oil, plus gas, plus coal, plus nuclear. All these new capacity additions, 49%, solar alone, 51%, the size of it. And China, I mentioned to you, and electricity, I mentioned to you. So they are coming very strongly, and they are coming also rapidly. Therefore, they change our view of how we define the energy security, sustainability, and they need a reappraisal for many countries. And we think no government, no industry, even the citizens have the luxury not to follow these changes and implications for their own business. Therefore, one may well make some wrong decisions which may lead to from stranded assets in some cases, in the other cases, It may go to wrong decisions. So therefore, these changes are going to affect all of us, we think. Now, India, first of all, in terms of where the demand comes from, is becoming the leading energy demand growth country in the world, with about 7% the economic growth rate, population growth, and urbanization. And in my view, very wise energy policies, India is moving to the center stage of global energy affairs, especially for oil demand. They are putting their stamp, coal, solar, electricity, and more we will see on the natural gas part. What is happening also is that some countries which have been considered as the, for some Middle East countries, major energy exporters, they're at the same time big energy consumers now. And we also see that the United States is turning to be an energy exporter after years and years of being a major energy importer. So there's a change in the roles of the countries. Now, fuels and their contribution to global energy mix. In terms of coal, we are expecting a slowdown of coal. There are about 200 gigawatts of new coal plants under construction now worldwide. They will go ahead. But with the current policies, we don't expect huge expansion of coal. It will grow, but much slower than it did in the past. Oil will continue to grow, oil demand, maybe a slowdown, but still a healthy growth. Gas will grow stronger than before. And one issue here is that for the gas, I should say natural gas. In the past, the natural gas consumption was driven mainly by power generation. More and more, with China, India coming in the picture, it will be also for heating, industrial processes, and other things, gas will be used. And renewables are the main source of growth in many countries. Now, every year in the World Energy Outlook, we look at the one country in depth, and this year it was China, given the major change in China. What is the role of China in this picture? In terms of coal, in the last 15 years, when you talk about the world coal demand growth, it meant China coal demand growth. But now, China, as I said, putting a cap on the coal consumption, slight decline we expect, mainly as a result of addressing the local pollution issues. This is a serious issue in China, and it is a major driver of energy policy making. When we say environment, it is the first thing comes to their mind is this one. In terms of oil, China will still be an important driver of global oil demand growth. And in terms of gas, we are expecting China will grow very strongly in terms of gas demand growth. LNG mainly, but also some pipeline from Russia and others. In terms of low carbon, China is today the champion of #1 in wind, #1 in solar, #1 in efficiency, #1 in nuclear power across the world, and they will continue that direction in line with their new policy. So to sum up, as you saw, when you look at the past, China was #1 in coal, #1 in oil. Now they are moving to gas and also renewable energies. Now, a couple of numbers, and these are, first, they are not forecasts. These are the first part, 2010, 2016. Which power plants, sources, technologies are chosen by the world? When you look at it in the last 15 years, renewables were still the main driver of the new capacity additions, but followed by coal and gas. And in the future, again, coal will increase somewhat. Gas will grow again as much as it in the past. Nuclear, very limited growth, mainly coming from China and India, nuclear growth. And renewables are the main growth centers in many countries. This is mainly as a result of the declining costs of renewables. Once again, in many countries, the drive for renewables are not necessarily due to, for example, the climate change concerns. It is mainly as a result of them being cheaper or subsidized by the countries. In some countries, even renewables do not need significant subsidies anymore, especially when it comes to onshore wind, slowly solar, and maybe in the future offshore wind. So this is the picture that we are seeing in terms of electricity generation. Of course, we know that electricity generation is not the entire energy sector, but it's something important. Now, I want to put the things a bit in a context. The countries, to understand, because as I said this morning in the hearing, no country, even United States, is not an energy island. So we all affected from what happens here, what happens in that country. In some country, the consumption, the other one is the production. We are all affected from each other. So this is the capacity, electricity capacity, power installed capacity in different countries. And I wanted to bring the discussion in Europe and US in the power sector a bit into context for a global perspective. When you look at India electricity demand is going to grow. And I don't know if we have colleagues from the European countries here. In Europe, we have a very, very long discussions about the European power system. When it comes to regulations, shall we have the renewables share 20%, 22%? Shall we give some support to gas or not? Playing with 1 or 2 percentage points in the European electricity system. But India is adding, in the next 20 years, 1 Europe itself. So, just to put things in a context, we discussed about the current European capacity power system. Shall we do 5% growth here, 2% down? But India is adding 1 Europe. What kind of technologies they will choose will affect everybody. Put in a context. China is adding, in the next 20 years, equal to 1 United States. So, India is adding 1 Europe, China is adding 1 United States. This puts the things in a context. So therefore, the decisions what we are having at home here, in Washington or in Brussels, in Europe, these are definitely important for the countries, their policies and so on. But when you look at the global perspective, the decisions which will be made in New Delhi or in Beijing will have implications for all of us. Because if they go for technology X, even though it's a new technology, with the sheer size of the capacity additions, they can bring the cost down. If they go with technology Y, if the input for that technology is fuel something, then it will affect the fuel markets. So what I am saying is that the decisions, if you want to understand the global markets, it is important to look at our own countries, what's happening there, but also it is very important what is happening given the sheer size of China and India, those countries, because they are adding 1 Europe and 1 United States, in addition to what they have today. Why the demand is growing? It is electricity demand. Industrial motors is very important, something that we never talk in our daily lives, but this is the main driver of electricity demand worldwide. Cooling will be more and more important. And this, we are going to prepare a new report on the importance of the air conditioners efficiency standards. You cannot believe, and I didn't know, how important having the air conditioners with the right efficiency standards, how much it will affect the global power markets, a study that my colleague Dave Turk is leading at the IEA. And of course, digitalization and others are pushing the electricity demand worldwide. So the future is electrifying, and the next World Energy Outlook will focus on the electricity markets and its future and how it is going to change the global economy in the next years to come. Now, there is one discussion in the energy oil markets. So this is when John Hess is here. It is very difficult to talk about oil markets, but I was still there. The question is the following: are we going to see a peak of oil demand because electric cars are coming very strongly? Now, we at the IEA, we believe in numbers. So what we did is that today, I tell you very simply, today we have about 2 million electric cars in the world. But all the cars we have is about 1 billion. 1 billion all the cars, 2 million electric cars. But electric cars are skyrocketing in many countries, especially in Europe and in China, because of two reasons. One, the cost of batteries are coming down, and the second, many governments, especially in Europe and also in China, giving generous subsidies. So as a result of that, we expect the number of electric cars will increase substantially, and around 2040 will reach almost 300 million cars, which is compared to industry expectations in the middle of the expectations of the car industry and others. So 300 million cars, huge increase, out of a car fleet at that time about 2 billion cars. 2 billion cars, altogether 300 million being the electric cars. So big skyrocketing. So does it mean that we are now going to see a peak oil demand? Because the issue is the electric car discussion is focusing on A, oil demand, and B, emission reduction, because many people think when they buy electric car, CO2 emissions will disappear. So we look at both of the impacts. For oil demand, first of all, it's true that the electric car penetration and at the same time increasing efficiency of the cars will decrease the oil demand for cars. There is no question about that. So therefore, the global oil demand will go down in the future compared to today because of the electric cars and efficiency increase of the internal combustion engine cars. Second, another driver of bringing the oil demand down, is in many countries, we use oil for electricity generation. And this is going to go to a minimum very soon. Either they are replacing in natural gas or with renewable energies in many countries in the world, especially in Middle East. So why do we say, despite that, the oil demand is still growing? Very simple. The growth is coming from trucks, jets, and mainly petrochemical industry. The growth is coming from there. Let me give you one number. In the last 3 years or so, about 1/3 of the global oil demand growth came from the Asian trucks only, the trucks in Asia. Jets and petrochemical do also contribute. So trucks, there is almost no alternative to oil products for the time being. Aviation is the same, and petrochemical is the same. And it is the reason we believe that while oil demand growth may slow down, we still see it is going to grow. I want to give you also, I am sorry to give these numbers, but I find them very important. There are many oil people here. This discussion started in 2014, oil demand peaking or not. And between 2014 and today, oil demand increased about 6 million barrels per day since this discussion started. And the second, more importantly for me, share of oil in the global energy mix also increased. I want to repeat again. Share of oil in the global energy mix increased as well. So there is a debate, oil peak debate, but this is the numbers that happened, and we expect what will happen in the future. Now, United States. This is, of course, as I said, this is the big success story. And we are expecting a huge increase of oil and gas production in the United States. And this is the growth is not only big in terms of volumes, but also the speed. The speed between 2008 and 2022, so it is about 15 years of time, that growth of oil coming to markets happened only once in the history when the Gavar was started to produce oil. In terms of natural gas, the growth is also so big, and it is the biggest. It took over from the Western Siberian gas fields of Russia, Soviet Union at that time, 1960s. So in terms of the numbers and in terms of speed, it is unique in the world, and this will be changing the discussions a lot. When the prices go up, I came here from Abu Dhabi. I told my colleagues there, the Middle East colleagues, it may be good for the producers there, but one has to think of one step ahead. What will be the implications for this picture? We are revising our U.S. oil production numbers. We make our monthly reports, oil market reports, some of you may know, and most of the time we are revising them always upwards. And it is with the Brent $70 prices, we may well again revise our numbers. So this has a big implication. This is an implication for oil markets, gas markets, geopolitics of energy, energy security. It is completely, as I said, the upheaval, and it has implications also for the other exporters, for example, gas exporters, and also, of course, for the importing countries. And in my view, as somebody who is in charge of an organization whose core mandate is to look after the global energy security, I am very happy to see this very picture. Now, from here, I want to say a few words on natural gas. I mean, you all know that natural gas is transported in two ways. One is with pipelines, the other one is with LNG. And currently, about 60% of the gas, natural gas in the world is transported by pipelines, about 40% by LNG. But looking at the future and looking at the existing projects and our expectations, about 90% of the growth in international gas trade is coming from LNG. Almost LNG, and it is pipelines are much less pronounced, and the picture will change, and LNG will be the dominant way of transporting gas from point A to point B. And this is, of course, mainly as a result of what is happening in the United States, but also in Australia and in Canada. The gas exporters, the picture is changing. Russia had the biggest chunk today, and it is Australia, United States, and Canada coming on board, and they are becoming major gas exporters, and as such, changing the dynamics of the gas markets. Also, importers are also changing. Europe was the largest importer of gas, and Asia is coming in the picture. In addition, China, India, of course, established importers such as Japan and Korea. Beginning of this century, there was about 13, 14 LNG importers, and with the current constructions of the LNG terminals finishing in 2020, this 15 will be 50. So in a very short period of time, number of LNG importers are increasing, mainly those in emerging countries. And because why? It provides diversification. The prices seem to be reasonable in next years to come, and there's a lot of competition there. But many of those important countries, gas importers, are so-called opportunistic buyers. They will look at the prices. If they like it, they will buy the LNG. So it is one of the reasons why we think there is a significant room for gas to penetrate the energy markets of many countries. And two of them are very important, of course, China and India, who have very low level of natural gas penetration in their energy systems, about 6% or so, compared to global average of over 25%. And US coming in the market, the Canada, Australia coming in the market as a major exporters, it will bring more flexibility. Contracts will change, how they make the contracts, the duration of the contracts much shorter. And there is one major issue that the many Asian colleagues complain since long time, the final destination clause. It will go from A to B, full stop. It will change. It will be much more flexible, much more trading. So gas markets will be much more diversified and flexible in the next years to come, which is, I think, a good news. Now, before talking to the environmental issues, there is one topic that I wanted to highlight here, which is, as Mr. has mentioned, it is very important for the IEA, which is the access to electricity, access to energy of the world. Some of the colleagues may know, who follow our work since a long time, that we have been looking at the world, how many people that have no access to electricity in the world. And currently, 1.1 billion people, a bit less than 20% of the global population, they have no electricity. Where are they? They are in three places, mainly India, the other Southeast Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And India is doing an excellent work, by the way. The Prime Minister Modi and his team, they have this electricity for all program, and very soon we are going to see India will have universal electricity access. This is a very good news, I think, for at least for the energy people, because a continent, almost a continent like India, will go to have electricity, and they bring electricity in 10 years of time, more or less, to 500 million people. It is not peanuts if you think of the India and the economic development level there. Bangladesh, Pakistan making also a good job, and other Asian countries. The electricity access problem will remain as an African problem. It is a continent that we don't see major good news coming. And in the past, we were discussing this electricity access is an emerging country problem. Then it went shrink to 3 regions, India, Africa, and the rest Asia. Now, very soon, it will be only an African problem. The continent which is one of the highest, richest sources of energy. So this is an issue that we are very much working on. Now, these are the trends I show you now. Where do we go with the current policies of the governments, current policies, expected policies? But some of those trends don't end up with happy results. One of them is this picture, for example. People have no access to electricity. Second is the targets set in Paris, the targets to be in line with our climate targets cannot be reached with the picture I showed to you. So therefore, we have developed a scenario which we call a sustainable energy scenario, which brings 3 objectives together: address the climate change, universal energy access for everybody, and another big problem, in my view, improve the air quality in the developing world. How we can do it, and while we are, most importantly maybe, we are reducing the emissions to the Paris levels. What needs to be done? Huge. Huge. Just give you a couple of ideas. First of all, we have to increase energy efficiency substantially, ×2, which is a very, very tall order. More gas demand, more gas replacing, especially the coal which is used in the primitive coal power plants. More solar capacity and more electric vehicles. And to do this, you would need 15% additional investments compared to the pictures I showed to you. You need to make a big transformation, but the money will not be so big, but the money needs to be rechanneled to the different parts of the energy solutions. And this will be the way to address our climate and other issues. Now, to finish, a couple of conclusions. The oil and gas sector in the United States is shaking up the established order. Everybody is affected, I can tell you. Everybody is affected, and it will be more and more affected in the next years to come. And it affects the energy security considerations, investments, trade flows. All of them will be affected as a result of U.S. new position. Gas is one of the winners, both in electricity generation, but also in terms of feeding the petrochemicals and also heating and industrial sector. There are two challenges in front of gas, I see. One of them is the price specs. If we see price specs, it is not the gas advantage vis-a-vis coal will not be, especially in Asia, will not be so obvious if you see price specs. Second, the methane leakages from gas is an important issue. And this can be fixed with the right policies, right measures by the companies. Some of the companies are doing a good work to reduce or minimize the leakage from gas production and transportation, but some don't do their homework. So if you want to see gas growing, we have to see this methane leakage, and sustainability being responsible company is important. I think Hess is a very important example to follow in that respect, as was said by John before. Now, China, they will continue to, because the sheer size of China, both energy, economy, population, they will continue to put their stamp on energy trends, but this time different than in the past. It was mainly coal and oil. Now, slowly but surely, this will go to gas, the renewable technologies, and others. We have came up with a strategy, the sustainable development scenario. As I said, one of the things we do there is looking at universal access. One of the colleagues here, Morgan Basilian, worked on that several years. The air quality and also climate change. And this is a strategy which is very pragmatic one. And we hope that the countries look into that, and we are seeing that more and more countries are interested to bring these three objectives together. Energy security, but at the same time addressing the climate change and improving the air quality in an affordable context. Now, electrification. It is really a major issue for two ways. One, the investment to electricity is growing very, very strongly. One thing I should tell you, we look at the investment trends every year, how much money is invested in which sector. For the first time since several decades, electricity investments were higher than oil plus gas investments, for the first time. Another indication I can tell you, many oil and gas companies are looking at the electricity sector and finding something in the electricity sector to include their portfolio. These are important signals. Electricity is penetrating because of the digitalization of our lives, because of the many industrial processes now benefiting the electricity as an input. This is something create a new opportunity, but at the same time, electricity becoming dominating our entire energy system, social system, economic system, increase the vulnerability of the attacks. Because the surface attack is, the surface area is much higher for a possible attack, and the cybersecurity becomes a very important issue with the increasing electrification of our system. From communication to energy, from energy to health, from health to taking the lift here, everything is linked to electricity. Therefore, electrification is very important. It means modernization, but at the same time has implications for the electricity security, cyber security. So these are some thoughts I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.
Great. Fatih, thank you so much for once again coming and presenting the World Energy Outlook. I'm Sarah Ladislaw. I direct the Energy National Security Program. I just wanted to add my thanks to John and John Hamre for you to be here again, and for the entire team, which you know really well. We always enjoy having you here. I also wanted to congratulate you on being named the Financial Times Energy Personality of the Year. We always knew you were an interesting energy personality, but it seems like the rest of the world's figuring it out too. We're going to open it up for questions, and we've got about 40 minutes, so hopefully we'll have some time for a good discussion. I did want to reflect on something, because you were testifying this morning, and we were able to watch a little bit of it. Your first major upheaval is one that I think we're reflecting on a lot, both here in Washington and with a new administration, which is the fact that the U.S. has a lot more energy supply than we are used to. And you don't hear lots of conversation about security so much anymore. It's a lot about competitiveness and economic opportunity. You focused a lot on the oil and gas side of the equation, clearly exports being an opportunity for economic growth and job creation here. What else should the U.S. be looking at in terms of global opportunities? I'm sure you hear about competition out there as much as you do security as you go around the world these days.
So thank you very much, Sarah. I think, first of all, when it comes to competition, U.S. both oil and gas, they have both very, very advantageous position. Oil, if you talk about the oil exports, crude exports, the quality of the U.S. oil is much, much better than many others. So there's a big advantage there. In terms of gas, the gas security has been a big problem in Europe many years, and many European countries would see the U.S. gas coming to Europe not only in terms of economic opportunity, but also diversification opportunity there. And U.S. is also doing something. We have very distinguished ambassadors here. They know better than me. But U.S. is doing something perhaps you are not aware of that very much, something good for Europe, which is the following. In Europe, many countries are now negotiating, and it will be even more in 19 and 20, their long-term gas price contract with the established pipeline gas exporter. And the fact that there is now an alternative to that pipeline gas, they use it as an important card in their hands to renegotiate the prices down and have economic benefits from that. This is something very, very important for many European countries, and I know many European countries have already registered significant benefits and brought the price down. Another area that U.S. can benefit is it's not my professional issue, but again, we have very distinguished ambassadors here. I can tell you that Mr. Tillerson, when he goes to international negotiations, it can be any subject, he must be sitting in his chair much more comfortable than his predecessor, because of he is now a Secretary of State of a country who is a major energy power in the world. So this is also another important aspect that I think the US colleagues may want to be aware of. And third, by this amount of oil and gas coming from a country like the United States, definitely helps the improvement of the global energy security. So these are three areas I think is very important as a result of this strong growth of oil and gas in the United States.
One more question, and then I want to open it up so everybody get your questions ready. You have a sustainable energy scenario, which seems really appropriate given the sustainable development goals that have been put front and center for much of the developing world. How much of it did you find combining both the greenhouse gas emissions goal, which was a focus of your earlier scenarios, with things like air pollution? I don't know if water's in there as well or not, but some of those other SDGs, how has it really changed the way you're able to engage with countries who, of course, they're interested in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but very interested in local air pollution, water, and other sort of SDG goals as well?
It's a very good question as well. It goes very well with what Mr. Hess said today. At the IEA, we have been an organization of the many years. We were known as the rich man's energy club, something that I hated, to be honest with you, to be called like that. And when you look at our numbers, any energy organization need to work with China and India, so because the growth is coming there, otherwise you lose your relevance. So it is the reason in the last 2 years, we got China, India, Brazil, Mexico, all of these countries, Indonesia, as part of the IEA family. And if you work with them, you have to show that you have an eye on their imperative policy preoccupations. One of them is air pollution. Today, if you go in India, Indonesia, in the street, what is the environmental problem? Nobody will tell you it's climate change. Or China is the same, India is the same. Air pollution is the main problem there. So we try to combine these three energy objectives country by country and try to get this result. And we are very happy that we got a huge resonance from that, from those countries. And I am going to go to from here to, in fact, to New York, talk with the United Nations Secretary General, I think, to talk about the IEA's work on this in terms of the SDGs.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Great. Congratulations. Okay, we're going to open it up. Fatih always makes a lot of time to be able to take questions from all of you. So please state your name and affiliation, question in the form of a question if you can, and we'll start over on this side of the room. I'll take them in threes, okay? Yep. So we'll take these two, and then Mr. Jeffries right there. It's coming. He's right on your left-hand side, sir. There you go.
Thank you. Steve Winters, independent consultant. In your projections, I'm not quite sure where you factored in possible new discoveries or discoveries that are sort of underway. For example, the so-called flammable ice or whatever, methane deposits in the South China Sea, or Russian ideas of fields in the Arctic. So is that factored in there somewhere?
Okay. And then we'll go right here.
Thank you so much. My name is Sergio Martinez. I'm former intern in the energy program at Inter-American Dialogue. I wanted to ask you a question about the observation that you made that efforts need to be redoubled in sub-Saharan Africa, and it is critical that still 600 million people are still without access to electricity. So my question is, so what could be the policy implications of the cooperation between the international and multilateral community with government agencies and private sector in sub-Saharan Africa, especially when it comes that clean energy investments are related to economic and social inclusion and private sector development? Thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll do Ambassador Jeffries right here, and I'll take another round.
Welcome back, Fatih. A question on energy security. You've postulated that oil demand will rise somewhere in around 10+% over the next 22 years. In prior International Energy Agency reports, you saw, I think after 2025, the percent of the supply of that to meet that demand coming out of the Middle East actually grows. Is that still your belief? Thank you.
Okay, you want to take those?
Yes.
All right.
Now, first of all, let me give a number about the new discoveries, which is very, in my view, very frustrating. The 2016 and 17 were not only the lowest number of discoveries we had, but also the lowest number of sanctioned resources. This is very depressing. In a world where we lose every year, on average, about 2 million barrels per day because of the decline of the existing fields. So fields are declining, no new discoveries are, or no significant amount of new discoveries coming. So I have to, of course, once again congratulate Mr. Hess for Guyana today. So it's a big, these are exceptions. Now, why not discoveries are coming? Of course, everybody can have a different view, but my view is when you look at the expenditure of the companies' share, what they spend for what, the money went to the discoveries, exploration work, went down by 50% in 2 years of time. So 50% reduction for the exploration work. So you find something if you look for. So we don't look for oil, so we don't find oil. So this is very normal because we don't put money there. So this is the result of the company's policies. And why don't they look for oil? Of course, there are many reasons: the oil prices, the dating the shale, and etc. Now, coming to your question, we assume the continuation of the trends in terms of discoveries. We take the 6 or 7 years of average, how much oil is discovered. And of course, this goes from region to region, basin to basin, in line with the available potential of oil, the resources, and their historical trends. So they take into account the new discoveries. Of course, every discovered oil will not necessarily go to markets immediately. There are many issues there, from technological issues, the economic issues, whether or not viable or not. They are all analyzed on a project-by-project basis. So Africa, now, the Africa doesn't need any resources. It is huge gas resources, huge renewable resources. 320 days in Africa, we have direct solar potential, wind potential, huge hydropower potential. What we need there is the first capital investment in many cases, and regional integration of some of the projects. Some of the hydro projects are so big that it goes over the borders, different countries, and those countries have to work together in order to develop those projects, and this is not happening. But what makes me hopeful, at least one hope, is the following. In Africa, we see two interesting trends. There is a lot of distributed generation related electricity connections, and many countries are pushing to bring electricity to their citizens. And this comes at a time when the cost of renewables are going down. So this is a good move. Second, there were many gas discoveries in Africa, east of Africa, and I hope those countries will make use of that. But our projections show that looking at the population growth in Africa as well, it will be very difficult to see in Africa with these policies, without some strong support internationally, we see that Africa will soon have a universal electricity access. Mr. Ambassador's point is very true. Middle East will be still bringing a lot of oil in the markets, and as a producer and exporter. I think one should not mix two things, especially when it comes to the United States. This is something that I hate to perhaps sometimes unnecessarily bring it to our attention, which is the following. U.S. becoming a major oil producer, or will be the #1 oil producer, doesn't mean that U.S. will be a major oil exporter. These are two different stories. We will still need oil from Middle East, from Africa, from Brazil, and elsewhere to feed the markets in Asia and other countries. U.S. oil exports will increase, maybe, I think last year it was about 1 million barrels per day crude exports, but it will never replace Middle East. So we will need Middle East for considerable time, and is a major exporting region. Therefore, whatever's in Middle East is still very, very, very important. So just wanted to highlight this very issue. What happens in the Middle East in terms of the geopolitics, in terms of oil and gas and everything. So this is what I wanted to say.
Okay, we'll take another round. We'll go this gentleman right here, and then we'll do you two right in the middle, and then we'll come over to here, I promise.
Rafiq from CBC TV. Fatih, my question is about European energy diversification you just mentioned. There's not much space to provide energy to Europe. One of key routes is South Gas Corridor. So the question is that what's your organization perspective about this gas corridor? And would there be Central Asian countries would join them, or Iraqi oil will join them through Turkey? Thank you.
Okay. And then Will and the gentleman in the blue coat in front of him.
Will Cole, Johns Hopkins. I read with interest about your efforts to strengthen relationships with other countries around the world. But can you explain your newer relationships with China, India, Brazil, to participate more in the IEA? Have those been formalized, and in what way, and how does that work?
Thanks. Colin Reese from Oil Change International. Question would be, based on the updated science, the Paris Agreement kind of lowered the international climate goal from 2 degrees, which people were aiming for, to well below 2 degrees, striving for 1.5. That's something all 30 IEA member states have signed on to and is quite welcomed. So I'm curious as to why, in the shift from the 450S scenario, formerly included as the climate scenario, to the SCS, why the emissions goals have basically remained unchanged in the WEO.
Yeah. So Europe is still the largest energy importer of the world, and one of the major preoccupations of the European countries, after having a few bitter experiences, to diversify their gas imports. And I think the South Corridor plus LNG plus one day maybe Eastern Mediterranean may well be very good alternatives. But among those, I would say LNG and the gas coming through Azerbaijan and other countries have an important advantage in terms of their economic feasibility, and it is the very reason why European Union is supporting this project, and hope that it will provide a diversification to European countries and provide a diversification contribution to energy security, gas security in Europe, and also some diversification of supplies. To be a member of the, Mr. Cole's question, to be a member of the IEA, currently you have to be a member of the OECD. And some of those countries do not want to be a member of the OECD, but they want to be a member of the IEA. Or they cannot be a member of the OECD, they want to be a member of the IEA. So what we have done is that for China, India, Brazil, we have an associate membership. We formalize it in that context, and they are part of the IEA family. Their rights and responsibilities are a bit different than the full members. But, for example, Mexico, who joined to IEA during the ministerial meeting, as a full member, as they were already a member of the OECD. So we are looking into this issue, these associate members, China, India, Brazil, Indonesia, how we can get them even closer to IEA, even closer than being a member of the family as associate member. It's an area that we are working, and with all these countries, we have 3 years very strong work program, ranging from energy security, efficiency to capacity training, from capacity training to renewable energies, working with them very closely. Now, and I should also tell you one thing about the IEA, since we talk about the IEA. 2 years ago, before we started our new process, my colleague Doug Hengel, he was also here, he knows it very well. IEA's share in the global energy mix was about IEA members' share, if you put all of these countries in the global energy mix, was 38%. Now, having these countries part of the IEA family now, in 2 years of time, today, IEA family's share in the global energy mix is 72%. So this is very important for the relevance of our organization. Now, we have if I didn't misunderstand your question, we have our 2 degrees, we had our 450 ppm, which is a 2 degree scenario in our previous editions. Now we have the sustainable development scenario. Our numbers are, the targets are fully in line with our 450 scenario, but as you rightly mentioned, some of our member countries and many of the colleagues and the Paris Agreement highlights the very fact that even 2 degrees would not be good enough. So we have to look at the well below 2 degrees, and we have also an additional scenario of what additional needs to be done if you want to go from a 2 degrees world, reaching the Paris targets below, what additional efforts are needed. It would require huge, exceptional transformation of our energy system at a very short period of time, but it is a very important move as it was highlighted in the Paris Agreement.
We'll take another round. We'll start right here. We'll go here, Doug. We're going to do 4 this time. Let's see how we do.
Good afternoon again. Happy to see you, Mr. Fatih. My question is, you talked about Africa. I come from Kenya, though I'm based here in Washington, D.C. Why is Africa so high in electricity? They don't have electricity. And as the America say we want to make America great, how can Africa make themselves great without electricity? We need manufacturing. They need manufacturing. They need to do things. Solar energy, wind, and cannot do much about manufacturing, growth of countries. So do you talk to the leaders, and how can you tell them, especially the countries of oil producing, what can they do to make their own continent great so that they don't come here to bother America? Thank you.
And we'll go right, Jesse, we'll go right back down to that young lady.
Thank you for your remarks. My name is Janet Larson. I'm with One Planet Strategies. Early on in your talk, you mentioned stranded assets, and I'm wondering if you could expand a bit on that topic, how it's coming up with your conversations with other energy leaders and energy companies, and perhaps that would also be a question for Mr. Hess as well. Thank you.
Jesse, we're going to go to Doug right there, and I'm going to take 2 more, okay?
Okay.
Doug Hengel with Johns Hopkins CSIS. Fatih, there has been some criticism of the IEA for underestimating the penetration of renewables, not only of the IEA, but of a number of forecasters, and not saying that it's an easy thing, but what has the IEA done to try to better capture what is going on in that space? And if you are underestimating renewable penetration going forward, how does that impact your scenarios here?
Great question, Doug. Okay, we're going to do Bill Hutterman and William right here.
Thank you. Fatih, Bill Hutterman, University of Pennsylvania. I had a question regarding your statement about gas contracts from the U.S. In my experience dealing with European colleagues, they were delighted at the prospect of getting U.S. LNG, but they were not prepared to pay any security premium for that gas. Were you suggesting that the ability to do a long-term pricing arrangement was the way around that? Thanks.
Thank you. Now, let me start with the Africa question. Electricity is the, source of life. This is not only the manufacturing, but the social life, our communication. So it is the, in my view, one of the biggest bottlenecks of Africa, not being able to make big leapfrogging in terms of economy, in terms of social development, and in terms of their communication with the rest of the world. So it is the very reason we believe that if this energy problem would be solved, then the economy would flourish. And when we look at some of the countries, for example, Ghana is a good example there. Ghana made excellent achievements in terms of the electrification, and the economy is growing very strongly in Ghana. So there are other countries which are making, Kenya is also making strong efforts, and Mozambique and Tanzania soon, I am sure, with their gas sources, turning them to power and also exporting them, will give a boost to their economic growth. So I don't know why Africans come here. Of course, you know much better than me. But if there are some economic difficulties at home, one of the ways of addressing these economic difficulties is to have more energy in the economic life. And this is the reason why that picture I show you is not only showing that there is a lot of still issues in Africa to bring access to electricity to people, but at the same time it means that the economy flourishing very strongly may not be in the horizon unless that problem is addressed. The issue of the standard assets, it can be for anything. It can be also for renewables. It can be for oil. It can be for gas. It can be for coal. What I wanted to say is that one has to understand these trends, otherwise one could make wrong decisions. It can be for any of the projects that you may have. In my view, what is some countries, for example, building in Southeast Asia, very low efficiency coal-fired power plants. It is, the efficiency rate is so low, and that it is, of course, generating electricity, but the emissions in terms of CO2 emissions, but also the local pollution is so high, and the cost of generating electricity is very, very high. So even though coal prices are not so high. So what does it mean? It means that in an environment where there is a, let's say, cheap LNG coming there, or solar energy being used since the costs are coming down, that coal-fired power plant may well be standard. And therefore, it is important to look at in the future, to look at the different alternatives and what are the competitors, what are they doing before deciding on those investments. It is what I wanted to mean, what I wanted to say with the standard assets. It can happen for anybody if we are not able to see the trends in a clear way. Now, what I show you is not a forecast. Coming to a question of Mr. Hengel in the renewables, what I show you is these are the results of the policies that the governments are today pursuing with the current technologies or the improvement of the technology with the price assumptions we have. We are not saying that the global oil demand will be 103.4 million barrels per day in 2030. This is not our interest, not aim. This is a projection on the basis of the current policies, technological improvements, what we assume. So therefore, we have, with the policies that the government had, the renewable projections what we had in the past may be on the conservative side. And this year, we have revised them up. And maybe, I can tell you, if the governments change their policies, giving more generous support to renewables, or the cost of renewables fell down further than we assume, we may next year again revise up our renewable projections. So our aim is to tell the decision makers, to tell the interested parties, with these policies, with this technological improvement rate, this is the picture we are going to heading. And if you like it, it's okay. If you don't like it, you may want to change it for your country, give more money to renewables, or accept the technological progress for this technology or that technology. Our aim is not to guess the future. We are just giving a framework for the policymakers, for the industry to think where the world is heading at with the current policy framework. For the US LNG, I am not as pessimistic as you are. For example, Poland is very happy now that they have an agreement with United States, and some other countries are also, I know, are talking with United States in terms of LNG. There may be, given the cost of the current cost of US LNG, plus there is still huge capacity in Russia from the existing fields to bring gas with the existing pipelines to the markets. There is still a competitiveness issue, but this can be, in my view, overcome through different type of contracts, and I don't want to spell out what kind of contracts are they, but it is important that the US LNG is there, an alternative to other pipeline exporters, and that there's a competition coming there. It is very important. I am sure that the many Europeans are thankful to United States for having that gas, so that they can bring the cost down as a result of negotiations, as they enjoy cheaper gas, what otherwise would be. Whether or not you can monetize it into money from Europeans, it's up to you. You have very clever negotiators here in this country. Perhaps they can discuss it with the Europeans. But thanks God, there is the US gas. Thanks God, this is the Canadian gas. Thanks God, there is the Australian gas, bringing more security to the markets.
John, did you want to? No? Okay. So we're going to do one more round if you have a minute. We've got 9 minutes. Great. Okay, so I had right there.
May I just, I forgot one thing to our colleague just mentioned there. Now, the stranded assets issue is very important, but and the sustainability issue. One number I wanted to tell you, which I find it very interesting, because I was in Abu Dhabi here. There was a Sustainable Energy Week there, the sustainability word. Perhaps some of the ambassadors may remember the concept of sustainability was brought to the agenda in 1987. There was a Norwegian prime minister called Brundtland. Madame Brundtland brought this thing. And the sustainability, the idea was bringing the share of fossil fuels down so that we have a sustainable world. In the year 1987, when this move started, the share of fossil fuels altogether in the global energy mix was 81%, 81. And in 30 years, many things happened. Renewables are cheaper, technology, governments change, many things change. And today, after 30 years, 2017, the share of fossil fuels in the global energy mix is still 81%. Just two numbers.
Okay, Bill.
Hi, Bill Eichord, consultant. Question about maritime traffic. I don't think you mentioned that specifically, but there are fuel changes going on there, and what are you looking at in terms of how that affects your numbers?
Okay, and then Jesse, we're going to go right over there.
Thank you. David Hunter, Electric Power Research Institute. In the slide that you showed on projections for oil consumption and growth in oil consumption in the future, where you talked about electrification and potential impact of electrification on that growth, I wonder to what extent you've looked at scenarios which could combine breakthrough technologies to lead to sort of radically different trends in adoption. And I'll give two examples of that. One would be a combination of autonomous vehicles with electric vehicles, such that people might decide that they no longer need to own a vehicle. and which would change the adoption rates. And then second, autonomous trucks or semi-autonomous trucks, such as Elon Musk's announcement of the ability to convoy in their new semis.
Thanks, David. And we'll do one final one here, William.
Hi, Christina Zhang from Navgen Research. You talked about how there may be a growing demand for cooling in the future and the role of air conditioners in terms of emission reduction, and that there's the work underway with the US government. So could you speak a little bit more about that, please?
Okay. So maritime oil demand is something that not very much talked. But it is not as big as aviation, but it also does contribute significantly to the trucks, petrochemicals, aviation, and together with the maritime, these are the four factors bringing the oil demand up. Now, with the maritime, the advantage of maritime is it can be more easily substituted oil there by natural gas, especially when it is long haul travels. And there is a lot of work going there to make more use of LNG. Many countries, especially Japan, Korea, and the others are working on that. The substitute possibility is there, and we look into that, and our numbers consider that much more than, for example, jets. With the EVs, electric cars, we have, of course, it is, again, I say there will be 300 electric cars in our scenario, but it can be 250, it can be 350, we don't know. This is our assumption based on the scenarios of different countries, their plans with automotive industry we talk, and the certain assumptions on the cost of batteries, how much they are going to decline, and the government support. As a result of those, we make these assumptions. When it comes to trucks, we have assumed a lot of logistical improvements in the trucks and efficiency improvement in the trucks, because today, for cars, the private cars, there are more than 50 countries which has fuel efficiency standards, but for trucks, there are only 4 countries who have fuel efficiency standards for trucks. By the time we assume that more countries will have efficiency standards for trucks, which will improve the consumption of oil by the trucks. But we have not assumed the Musk, for example. You mentioned that what we have seen in the internet will be a part of the very soon of the electric truck fleet will be a part of the global truck fleet. We have not assumed that. If such a development happens, of course, it may change our trends. But if you ask me, I would like to suggest you to look at the cost and the technology used to build these trucks, at least for now. For the cooling, I believe cooling is a very important part of our electricity systems, and the cooling needs are growing in 3 regions: China, India, and Middle East. With the increasing income levels, they are buying air conditioners, and the efficiency standards in all these 3 regions are extremely poor. If those air conditioners were made or developed, manufactured with the similar standards we have in the US or Europe and Japan, they would need much less building power plants that I show here. It is an area that we are working. It was not with the US government. We are doing it at the IEA, but as I said, Mr. Dave Turk, you may want to talk with him. He's in charge of this work. We will look if those countries were to adopt the efficiency standards for air conditioners, how much less power plants they would build and how much money they would keep in their pocket, giving advice to those countries.
We didn't talk much about it today, but I just wanted to say the digitalization report that you did this year, you're doing increasing amounts of special reports. Yeah. They're certainly very valuable. I commend them to anybody who hasn't read them yet. Fatih, I just want to say thank you on behalf of John Hess, John Hamry, all of my colleagues who are getting too numerous to mention, but you know all of them very well. It's always such a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for spending time with us, and we hope you'll come back again.